Barry Manilow spent 50 years surviving everything the world threw at him: poverty, invisibility, cancer, and his own silence. And at 822, facing a second diagnosis alone in a hospital bed, he finally revealed what endurance actually costs and what it quietly builds. There is a photograph. It was posted without warning, without a press release, without a publicist's careful wording, softening the edges. Just a man in a hospital gown, the kind of green that makes everyone look smaller than they are, lying in a bed that was clearly not his own, in a room that smelled, you could almost tell, of antiseptic and recycled air. The caption was 2 words: "Better today." That was it. No explanation, no context, no mention of what had put him there, or how serious it was, or whether better today meant what people hoped it meant. Within hours, the post had been seen by millions of people. People who had grown up with his voice in their kitchens and their cars, and the quiet spaces between bigger moments. People who had never met him and felt, somehow, that they knew him anyway. But here's the thing nobody was asking out loud: what exactly had happened? And why, at 82 years old, after surviving throat cancer, after breaking Elvis Presley's Las Vegas record, after 85 million records sold and 5 decades of being dismissed by critics who turned out to be wrong about nearly everything, why did this man still feel the need to reassure everyone else that he was okay? What does a life like that actually look like from the inside? And what does a man still reach for when the body keeps saying, stop, and the mind keeps saying one more song? The critics had a word for him, several actually. Schmaltzy was the polite one, soft was another. Sentimental appeared so frequently in reviews throughout the 1970s and 1980s that it might as well have been his official descriptor. Rolling Stone, the publication that positioned itself as the arbiter of what mattered in American music, essentially treated Barry Manilow as a cultural joke, the musical equivalent of a participation trophy, pleasant enough, deeply unserious. Popular in the way that things become popular when enough people stop thinking critically. The rock establishment agreed. They gave their awards to other people and wrote their serious profiles about other artists and constructed brick by careful brick an entire architecture of dismissal around a man who was at that exact moment selling out arenas across the country. He sold 85 million records. He placed 51 singles in the top 40. He earned a Grammy, a Tony, an Emmy nomination. Frank Sinatra, a man who did not distribute compliments carelessly, told the British press at the height of Manilow's commercial run that he was simply next, as in next in the line of genuinely great American popular singers. The critics kept sharpening their knives anyway, and Barry Manilow kept not fighting back. He did not chase their approval or reshape his sound to earn their respect or issue statements defending the emotional directness of his music. He just kept making it, kept filling the rooms, kept connecting with the audience that the critics had decided was not sophisticated enough to matter. That audience, it turned out, was most of America. But the sales figures and the sold-out venues are not actually the story. They are the visible surface of it. The story is what was underneath all of it, the parts that did not appear on any chart. The private architecture of a life that looked from the outside like an unbroken string of commercial triumphs, and felt from the inside like something considerably more complicated. Barry Allen Pincus was born on June 17, 1943, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Not the Williamsburg that exists today, the one with the artisan coffee and the gallery openings and the rents that consume a paycheck before it clears. The Williamsburg of 1943 was tenements and fire escapes and thin walls through which you heard everything your neighbors felt. It was the kind of neighborhood, Barry would say decades later, where if you asked a cab driver to take you back there now, he would simply refuse. His mother, Edna, was a stenographer. His father, Harold Keller, was an Irish truck driver whom Edna's Jewish family had tolerated only barely, and only because they managed to excavate from somewhere in Harold's ancestry a single Jewish relative from the 19th century, a great-uncle named Pincus, sufficient justification in their estimation to make the marriage presentable. They made Harold legally change his surname. The whole arrangement was, Barry would later recall with dry humor, exactly as desperate as it sounds. Harold left before Barry was 2 years old. The family ensured there was no further contact, no letters, no explanations offered to the child who would spend the next several decades writing songs saturated with longing without ever quite being able to name where the longing originated. He was raised by his mother and her parents, Russian Jewish immigrants who had built something from nothing through sheer refusal to accept that difficulty was a permanent condition. They were poor in the way that leaves a mark. Not the romanticized poverty of memoirs, but the grinding kind, the kind with real consequences, real limitations, real silence, where options should have been. Barry was, by his own admission, an awkward child, lonely. He called himself ugly without self-pity, but without softness either. The ugliest kid in school, he once said, in the flat, declarative way of someone who has long since stopped needing the statement to hurt. He did not have many friends. He was shy in the way children are shy when the world has not yet given them sufficient reason to trust it, and so he turned inward, and what he found there was music. At 7, he started accordion lessons. It was the instrument his mother could justify, affordable, available, practical. He practiced, he got good, he played at family gatherings and for his grandparents and for anyone who would sit still long enough. But the accordion had its limits. It was not yet the language he was beginning to hear in his own head. Then came the stepfather. Barry was 12 or 13 when his mother, riding the subway, ran into an old friend, a man named Willie Murphy, an Irish truck driver, a former acquaintance of Harold Keller's. Edna and Willie began seeing each other. They eventually married. Barry's grandmother objected because of course she did, but Willie Murphy turned out to be the person who handed Barry Manilow the keys to an entire musical world he had not known he was looking for. Willie brought home records, not rock and roll. Barry would later admit he had actively disliked much of the early rock era, that Bill Haley had left him cold, that it took the Beatles to convince him there was anything worth investigating in the genre. Willie's records were different. Sinatra, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Jerry Mulligan, Broadway cast albums, Carousel, Kismet, The King and I. When my stepfather came into my life and brought with him that stack of albums, Barry would say more than 60 years later, he changed my life with just that. Willie took him to see Jerry Mulligan play live at Town Hall in Manhattan. Barry would describe the experience as a thunderbolt. Something cracked open that night. The understanding that music was not simply entertainment, not just something you performed at family gatherings to make grandparents smile, but a living architecture of emotion, a structure you could build a life inside of. The family bought a piano, a Wurlitzer, $800, which represented a genuine sacrifice from a household where $800 was not a casual number. Barry took to it immediately. Playing that piano, he would say, was the beginning of my life. He graduated from Eastern District High School in 1961 and enrolled in the New York College of Music, then continued at Juilliard, the institution that trained the best in the country. To pay his way, he worked in the mailroom at CBS, sorting correspondence, learning corridors, watching how power moved through rooms. He was 18 years old, from a slum in Williamsburg, walking the hallways of one of the most influential broadcast networks in America. He was watching everything and filing it away. In 1964, he married his high school sweetheart, Susan Dykesler. She was warm and steady, and she believed in him during a period when the evidence supporting that belief was genuinely thin. The marriage was real. The love, by all accounts, was real. But Barry was already somewhere else in his head, already chasing what he would later describe as a wondrous musical adventure that left little room for anything else. He was not, he would acknowledge years later, the husband Susan deserved to have, not then. Perhaps not in the way that would have made the marriage sustainable. Susan had the marriage annulled in 1966. He was nearly 30 years old. He had never had a hit record. He had never had a spotlight of his own, but he had spent a decade learning every room he entered. The waiting was almost over. Clive Davis had just founded Arista Records in 1974. He had heard about the pianist who had been working the edges of New York's music scene for a decade, the jingle writer, the arranger, the man behind Bette Midler's sound. He wanted to sign him. More than that, he wanted to make him a star. You need a career-making single. That was what Davis told him. Barry Manilow never forgot the precision of those words. Davis sent over a recording, a moderately successful 1972 song by a British songwriter named Scott English, originally titled Brandy. It had briefly grazed the charts and faded. Most people had already moved past it, but Davis heard something underneath the surface of it, a reaching quality, a longing that could be redirected with the right voice and the right arrangement. The name had to change. Looking-Glass had already placed a different Brandy at number 1 2 years prior, and the confusion would kill the single before it left the building. They renamed it Mandy. Barry Manilow recorded it in 1974. On January 18, 1975, Mandy reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was his first entry on any Billboard chart. His first number 1. He was 31 years old. America had been hearing his voice for years without knowing it. Now, finally, it knew. What followed across the next 8 years was one of the most sustained commercial runs in the history of American popular music. I Write the Songs in 1975, a title heavy with irony, given that he didn't write it, though he sang it with a conviction that made it feel more his than anyone's. Looks like we made it in 1977. Weekend in New England, Can't Smile Without You. Copacabana in 1978, a dramatic story song about a showgirl and a lost love that won him the Grammy Award for Best Male Pop Vocal Performance and became the most enduring anthem of his career. 13 number 1s on the adult contemporary chart. 51 top 40 singles, 85 million records sold, a Las Vegas residency that would eventually shatter the record held by Elvis Presley himself. And through all of it, do every sold-out arena and every platinum album and every television special. The critics kept at it. Schmaltzy, bombastic, a purveyor of music for people who don't know any better. Here's the honest version of that criticism, the version that does not simply dismiss it. Barry Manilow's music is emotionally direct in a way that makes certain listeners uncomfortable. It does not hide its feelings behind irony or distance or sonic complexity. It simply says what it means and expects you to meet it there. For the rock establishment of the 1970s, which had constructed taste around a very specific idea of cool, that directness read as weakness, as excess, as a failure of restraint. What they missed, what the tens of millions of people buying his records understood intuitively, is that emotional directness is not the same as emotional simplicity. It takes considerable craft to write a melody that makes a stranger feel something real. The critics confused the accessibility of the feeling with a lack of sophistication in the making of it. Barry Manilow did not argue the point. He just kept working. But behind the sold-out shows and the platinum records, behind the Frank Sinatra endorsement and the Grammy and the adoration of the Fanilows, as his devoted fan base called themselves, Barry Manilow was carrying something heavy. In 1978, at the precise peak of his fame, he met a man named Gary Keefe, a television executive. The connection, by Barry's own account years later, was immediate and total. "I knew that this was it," he said. "I was one of the lucky ones. I was pretty lonely before that." Gary Keefe became his manager, then his partner, then, in every meaningful sense, his family. For 36 years, Barry Manilow kept that relationship hidden, not because he doubted it, not because it was anything less than the most sustaining relationship of his life, but because he had built his career on a connection with a fan base that was predominantly female, deeply devoted, and that he believed, perhaps incorrectly but genuinely, would feel deceived by the full truth of who he was. "I thought I would be disappointing them," he said later, "so I never did anything." Barry Manilow's response to that information was to get on the treadmill 3 times a day, and after every session, to count songs, stand still, breathe carefully, and sing. 1 song, 2 songs, 3. Then the breath gave out and he stopped. The next day he tried again. 3 became 4, 4 became 5. The voice that had survived throat cancer and returned stronger was finding its way back increment by careful increment, 1 song at a time. There is something worth naming here, something beyond the easy narrative of relentless optimism. Barry Manilow has never been a man who performs contentment he does not feel. He said it himself about the recovery, "I have no patience. It's been agony." Not the agony of despair, the agony of someone who knows precisely where he wants to be and cannot get there yet. That distinction matters. It is the difference between suffering that breaks and suffering that simply costs something while you pay it. He has paid a great deal over the course of his life. The absent father. The marriage he was not ready for. The decade of invisibility. The 36 years of silence about the person who mattered most to him. The throat. The lung. The critics who spent 3 decades being wrong about him in print and never quite finding the occasion to say so. And what he has built on the other side of all of that is not a simple triumph. It is something more textured than that. It is a life in which the music was always the through line, the organizing principle, the thing that made sense of everything else, even the things that did not make sense at the time. He and Gary raised a daughter together, Gary's daughter, Kirsten, who grew up to work in what became a genuine family business. In 2023, Kirsten adopted a daughter of her own. Barry Manilow, the boy from Williamsburg, who had spent his childhood lonely and certain that the world owed him nothing, became a grandfather. I've never ever thought about having a baby or having anything to do with being a father or any of that, he told People magazine. I'm watching this little girl, she's 2.5, grow up and learn. This is a brand new experience for me and I really am enjoying it. On March 3, 2026, he posted a video for his fans. He looked by all accounts like himself. Hi everyone, well, looks like I made it. A small smile. And I look fabulous, right? He was eyeing a return to Las Vegas by the end of March, arena dates in April, a full tour schedule through 2026, and a new album, his 33rd studio record, titled What a Time, featuring his single Once Before I Go, which had already reached the top 10 on the adult contemporary chart. 6 consecutive decades on the charts. No other artist in the history of the adult contemporary chart has sustained that kind of presence across that span of time. The run that began with Mandy in 1974 now extends unbroken into 2026. The album was executive produced by Clive Davis, the same Clive Davis who sat across a table from him in 1974 and said, "You need a career-making single." 52 years later, they were still in the same room, still building something together. Some things, it turns out, are built for longer than a season. There's a version of Barry Manilow's story that is simple and satisfying. The underdog who outlasted his critics, the quiet survivor who broke records nobody expected him to touch. That version is true. It just is not the whole truth. The whole truth includes the first marriage he walked away from, the years of jingles that paid the bills while the spotlight belonged to everyone else. The 36 years of carefully managing a private life because he did not yet trust his own audience with the full picture of who he was. It includes the critics who were not entirely wrong, who identified something real about his sentimentality, even if they drew the wrong conclusion from it. It includes the surgeries, the recoveries, the treadmill, the careful counting of songs one breath at a time. The whole truth is less of a clean arc and more of a long, uneven, genuinely human story, one that contains both extraordinary achievement and real cost, both great love and genuine loneliness. Both the performer the world saw and the man the world mostly did not. What is remarkable, in the end, is not that Barry Manilow survived everything. Plenty of people survive. What is remarkable is that at 82 in a hospital gown in a room that smelled of antiseptic, he still wanted to get back on the stage badly enough to run on a treadmill 3 times a day just to earn 2 more songs in his lungs. Not for the critics, not even for the record, for the people in the room. It's really all about you guys. It always was. If this story stayed with you, leave a word below for the boy from Brooklyn who is still counting songs. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, that endurance is not the same as ease, send this to them tonight.